"Sir, don't touch that." Derek sneered at Shaq like he was nothing. A second later, Shaq pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. The dealership went dead silent. Shaq smirked as he spoke into his phone. "I'll take every bike in here." Derek's jaw dropped. He had just messed with the wrong guy. Derek laughed in Shaq's face. "Bro, you can't even afford a test ride." A minute later, the entire dealership watched in horror as Shaq pulled out his phone and said, "I want every single bike." "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The moment Shaq stepped into the dealership, he felt it, the shift in energy. Everything in the showroom gleamed under bright lights. Luxury motorcycles lined the space like works of art. Ducatis, Harleys, BMWs, all polished to perfection. The air smelled of leather, fresh wax, and money. Shaq wasn't here to buy, just to look. Dressed in a simple hoodie, sneakers, and ripped jeans, he wasn't exactly the dealership's usual clientele, but that didn't matter to him. He had always loved bikes, machines that weren't just vehicles, but statements. He approached a limited edition Ducati, one of the rarest in the world. Sleek, black and gold, the kind of bike that turned heads on any street. He ran his fingers along the polished metal, admiring its flawless design. And then, the air snapped. "Hey, don't touch that!" The words cut through the room like a blade. Shaq turned, slowly, his hand still hovering over the bike. A man in a tailored suit, sleek hair, and an expensive watch stormed over with a look of pure arrogance. Derek. The name tag on his blazer confirmed it. He didn't stop until he was inches away, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as he looked Shaq up and down. "Look, man," Derek said, his tone dripping with condescension. "These bikes? They're worth more than your car. We don't want fingerprints on them." The silence that followed was suffocating. Other customers paused their conversations, glancing over. Employees peeked up from their desks. Someone in the back let out a quiet chuckle. Shaq blinked. Once, twice. Derek's smirk widened, as if waiting for him to step back, to apologize, to feel ashamed. Shaq just exhaled slowly. "More than my car?" he repeated as if tasting the words. Derek let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, more than your house too, probably." The chuckles from the back grew louder. A couple of salesmen exchanged smirks. A woman in a red dress watching from across the room tried to suppress a smile. Shaq could feel the weight of every stare in the room pressing down on him. And for a moment, just a moment, Derek looked triumphant. He thought he had won. Then Shaq smirked. It wasn't forced, it wasn't out of anger. It was the kind of smirk that said he was about to turn this entire situation upside down. Derek thought he had just put Shaq in his place. But that smirk? It meant the game had just begun. Shaq didn't blink. He didn't frown. He just let the moment breathe. The smirk never left Derek's face. He was enjoying this. The dealership was still buzzing, but the energy had shifted. A few customers had paused their conversations. Their curiosity piqued. Employees glanced at each other, some trying not to laugh, others pretending to be busy. Shaq could feel the weight of every stare, the unspoken judgment, the assumption that he was out of place. Derek wasn't just being rude. He was testing him. Shaq tilted his head slightly, eyes scanning the room, and then he spotted it, the most expensive motorcycle in the entire dealership. A custom-built, one-of-a-kind Harley-Davidson, trimmed in gold accents, the kind of bike only a billionaire or a collector would dare to own. He casually gestured toward it. "How much for that one?" The smirk on Derek's face widened. He let out a loud, mocking laugh, making sure everyone could hear. "Bro, do you even know what a down payment is?" The moment hung in the air, thick and heavy. A couple of other salesmen chuckled. A customer in a suit near the front smirked, shaking his head. A younger guy pretending to scroll on his phone gave Shaq a quick side glance before rolling his eyes. Shaq said nothing. He just watched Derek, letting the guy dig his own grave. Derek stepped closer, now towering over Shaq like he had already won. "Tell you what," he said, voice dripping with arrogance. "If you can prove you can afford it, maybe I'll let you sit on one." It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about power. Derek wanted to embarrass him. He wanted Shaq to admit he didn't belong here, that he couldn't possibly be in the same league as the real buyers. But what Derek didn't know? He was seconds away from the biggest regret of his career. From across the room, Lisa, another salesperson, stiffened. She had been watching the interaction carefully, a frown deepening on her face. Unlike Derek, she recognized Shaq. For a moment she looked like she wanted to step in, say something, but she hesitated. Derek was one of the top salespeople in the dealership, loud, confident, always bringing in high-end clients. Interrupting him in front of everyone? That was risky. Shaq finally chuckled, shaking his head. Then he pulled out his phone. "You know what?" Shaq said, his voice calm, unbothered. "Let me make a quick call." The words hung in the air. Derek's smirk didn't fade, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The other salesmen exchanged glances. Some of the customers, now fully invested in the drama unfolding, pretended to browse bikes, but were clearly eavesdropping. Derek crossed his arms. "Calling your rich uncle?" he taunted. Shaq just grinned. "Nah." He pressed the dial button. "Just checking something real quick." Derek smirked, assuming Shaq was just faking confidence, but he had no idea what was coming next. Derek leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his smirk oozing arrogance. Shaq stood calmly, phone pressed to his ear, waiting. The room was alive with tension, salespeople whispering to each other, customers pretending not to stare but hanging on every second. Derek couldn't help himself. "Calling your rich uncle?" he taunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Shaq didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge him. Instead, he let the moment hang, stretching the silence just enough for Derek to think he had the upper hand. Then Shaq's lips curled into a slow, knowing grin. "Nah," he said smoothly. "Just checking something real quick." Derek chuckled, shaking his head. He glanced over at the other salesman as if to say, "This guy's a joke." But that confidence, it vanished in the next 3 seconds. A deep, booming voice erupted from Shaq's speakerphone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yo, Shaq! What's up, big man?" Derek's smirk twitched. A few of the employees froze. Lisa, the only salesperson who had recognized Shaq earlier, hid a small grin. Derek's arms slowly uncrossed. The voice on the phone was unmistakable. The CEO of the entire dealership chain. Shaq was still relaxed, like this was just another casual conversation. "You still own this place, right?" Shaq asked, his tone light, almost playful. The CEO chuckled. "Yeah, of course. Why, you looking at something?" Derek swallowed. Shaq glanced around the showroom, then locked eyes with Derek. "Yeah," he said, voice even. "I want every bike in here." Dead. Silence. The room froze in time. The cash register beeped in the distance. The air conditioning hummed softly. But no one moved. Derek blinked. "Every bike?" The customers looked at each other, jaws slightly open. A woman near the back whispered, "Did he just say every bike?" Lisa's eyes widened. She knew Shaq was big, but this was something else. Derek felt his mouth go dry. His brain scrambled for an explanation, a way out, anything, but no words came. For the first time since Shaq walked in, Derek looked genuinely nervous. The CEO's voice came back through the phone, casual but intrigued. "Every bike? You serious?" Shaq smiled. "You know me." Another beat of silence. Then, "Done. I'll have my guys process it right now." Derek actually swayed on his feet. Lisa gasped. The other salesmen suddenly looked busy. Avoiding eye contact, they wanted no part of this mess. One customer laughed under his breath. Shaq turned back to Derek. "So, where were we?" Derek's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Shaq barely reacted, his expression cool and unreadable. But inside, he had already decided. Derek was about to learn a lesson he wouldn't forget. The dealership, a pristine palace of high-end motorcycles, had fallen completely silent. The customers, the employees, everyone was watching. Derek, who had been brimming with confidence moments ago, now stood frozen, blinking as Shaq's words sank in. "You want every bike?" Derek stammered. His voice had lost its edge, replaced with something closer to disbelief. Shaq nodded casually, as if he had just asked for a bottle of water instead of millions of dollars worth of motorcycles. "Yeah, every single one." A murmur swept through the showroom. The other salesmen exchanged wide-eyed glances, some whispering under their breath. Lisa, the only employee who had recognized Shaq from the beginning, covered her mouth, barely holding back a grin. Derek tried to recover, forcing out an awkward chuckle. "Sir, let me get my manager." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Why? You didn't need a manager when you were disrespecting me." Derek's face drained of color. The dealership's general manager, an older man in a tailored suit, practically ran out from the back office, his forehead glistening with sweat. He had clearly been watching the commotion from behind the scenes, and now realized how badly things had escalated. "Mr. O'Neill," the manager said, forcing a smile. "We had no idea you were here." "What an hoe." Shaq didn't let him finish. He gestured toward the bikes. "Not my problem. Ring 'em all up." Derek let out a choked sound. "Sir, I was just joking earlier, you know. Just having some fun." His attempt at a friendly chuckle died quickly. Shaq turned toward Lisa. Lisa, tell me something. How long you been working here? Lisa straightened. 3 years, sir. And you recognized me when I walked in? Yes. And did you treat me with respect? Of course, Shaq smirked, turning back to Derek. See how easy that was? The general manager looked between Shaq and Derek, then sighed. He knew what was coming. Derek, the manager said, his tone formal and clipped. You're dismissed. Derek's jaw dropped. Wait, what? Shaq crossed his arms. You were real confident when you thought I was just some broke dude in a hoodie. Now keep that same energy. Derek opened and closed his mouth like a fish gasping for air. His hands clenched into fists. This isn't fair. Shaq tilted his head. Nah. What's unfair is the way you treat people who don't look rich enough for you. Today, you got caught. Simple Derek turned to the general manager, desperate. Sir, please. The manager shook his head. You disrespected a customer, Derek. A VIP customer. He gestured toward the exit. You can leave now. Derek's face burned red. With a final glare at Shaq, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the dealership. The showroom erupted in whispers, but Shaq wasn't done yet. He turned back to Lisa. So, Lisa, how would you like a promotion? Lisa's eyes widened. Sir? Shaq grinned. You're the new lead salesperson. You cool with that? Lisa practically beamed. Yes, sir, thank you. The manager, still rattled but eager to please, nodded quickly. Absolutely, Mr. O'Neill. Consider it done. Shaq clapped his hands together. Good. Now let's talk about these bikes. The cashier hesitated. How would you like to handle the payment? Shaq smirked. I'll tell you. After you do one thing. The general manager swallowed. What's that? Shaq leaned forward, still grinning. Go outside, call in the people window shopping. I think it's time we give some bikes away. The manager blinked. Excuse me? Shaq nodded toward the glass storefront, where a few potential customers lingered, too intimidated to step inside. I bought every bike, Shaq said, voice calm but firm. Now I want to give them away. The entire dealership erupted in gasps. The employees froze in shock. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth. Derek, who had still been sulking just outside, turned around, hearing the words that made his stomach drop. Wait, he muttered, watching through the glass. He's serious? The customers who had once chuckled at Shaq now rushed inside, disbelief on their faces. Shaq held up a set of keys. Who wants a free motorcycle? The dealership exploded into chaos, but this time, the good kind. Derek's smirk was long gone. His face had turned a pale shade of defeat, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He looked around as if searching for someone to back him up, but all he found were silent stares. The customers, the employees, even the general manager, were watching him squirm. The cashier hesitated, glancing between Shaq and the manager. Do I actually start ringing these up? The general manager, clearly still rattled, nodded quickly. Do as he says. The register beeped as the first bike was scanned. The total amount on the screen made the cashier swallow hard. This was the biggest sale they had ever seen. Derek was sweating now. Listen, man, he started, his voice suddenly shaky. I didn't mean any disrespect. It was just, a misunderstanding. Shaq turned his head slightly, studying him. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. A misunderstanding. Derek nodded quickly, grasping at straws. Yeah, come on. You walked in here dressed like... He stopped himself, realizing he was about to make things worse. Shaq smirked. Dressed like what, Derek? Derek gulped. Nothing, man. Forget it. Shaq turned toward the cashier, completely ignoring Derek's presence. Hey, real quick, how much commission does a guy like Derek usually make on a sale like this? The cashier, eager to distance himself from Derek's mess, did some quick math. At this price? Probably around $50,000. A couple of employees whistled under their breath. Even some of the customers widened their eyes. $50,000. That was life-changing money for a salesman. Derek perked up immediately, his hope rekindled. Exactly. Man, come on. You don't want me to miss out on that, right? Shaq snapped his fingers. Oh, wait. That's right. He grinned. You didn't want my business. Derek's stomach dropped. The employees tried not to laugh. Even Lisa, standing to the side, had to bite her lip. Shaq let the silence linger, watching Derek grapple with reality. So, Shaq continued, stretching his arms, remind me again, who should I make sure gets this commission? Lisa's eyes widened slightly. She didn't dare assume he meant her, but a small hope flickered in her expression. Derek, realizing what was about to happen, lunged at the opportunity. Listen, man, Derek said, forcing a grin. I know I made a bad first impression, but I'm the top salesman here. I know these bikes inside and out. I can hook you up with the best deals, custom mods, whatever you need." Shaq held up a hand. "Nah, I already got everything I need." He turned to Lisa. "And you?" Lisa's breath hitched. "Sir?" Shaq gestured toward the register. "You ever made a commission like that before?" Lisa's eyes widened. "Never." Shaq grinned. "Well, you just did." The room erupted. Employees murmured in shock. Customers whispered. Even the general manager blinked in surprise. Lisa's hands covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Shaq chuckled. "You don't gotta say anything. You earned it by being the only person here who knew how to treat people right." Derek, on the other hand, looked like he was about to be sick, his jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "This is bull," he started, but Shaq cut him off again. Shaq shook his head. "This is consequences." Derek's face burned red. He turned toward the general manager, hoping for a lifeline. The general manager simply shrugged. "He's the customer, Derek." That was it. That was the moment Derek realized he lost. His biggest sale, gone. His reputation, wrecked. And worst of all, his co-workers were loving every second of it. The cashier couldn't hold back a laugh. One of the other salesmen muttered, "Damn, bro. That's gotta hurt." Derek gritted his teeth. His eyes darkened. "Man, forget this place," he muttered. Shaq watched as Derek stormed past the bikes, past the customers, past the employees who once respected him. He shoved open the dealership doors and disappeared into the night. For the first time since Shaq walked in, the dealership felt lighter. Lisa, still in disbelief, wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "Sir, I swear I'll work harder than ever. You won't regret this." Shaq grinned. "Oh, I know I won't." The cashier cleared his throat. Mr. O'Neill? Now that Lisa's getting the commission, how do you want to pay?" Shaq leaned in, smirking. "Oh, we're not done yet. I still got one more condition." The entire dealership froze as Shaq made his next demand. The moment Shaq spoke, the energy in the dealership shifted. Everyone, even the customers who had just been browsing, turned their full attention to him. The cashier's fingers hovered over the register, awaiting further instructions. The general manager stood stiff, his relief at securing a multi-million-dollar sale briefly overshadowed by Shaq's cryptic statement. Derek, on the other hand, he looked like a man on death row. "I'll tell you, if Derek does something first," Shaq repeated, his deep voice carrying across the silent showroom. Derek's throat bobbed. What do you mean?" Shaq didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Lisa, the one employee who had treated him with respect from the start. "Lisa, how long you been working here?" Lisa blinked, caught off guard. 3 years, sir." Shaq nodded. "And when I walked in, you recognized me, right?" Lisa hesitated, glancing at the general manager before nodding. "Yes." Shaq leaned in slightly. "And did you treat me with respect?" Lisa's eyes widened slightly, sensing something big was about to happen. "Of course." Shaq smirked. "You see where I'm going with this?" Derek did, and he didn't like it. Beads of sweat formed at his temple. He forced out a nervous chuckle. "All right, man, I get it. You made your point. No hard feelings, right?" Shaq let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head. "Nah, I'm just getting started." Derek swallowed hard. Shaq turned to the general manager. "You trust Lisa?" The manager nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. She's one of our best employees." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "That right? So tell me something. Why is she still taking orders from a guy like Derek?" A murmur spread through the showroom. A few employees smirked knowingly. They had clearly dealt with Derek's attitude before. Derek's panic deepened. "Wait a minute." Shaq held up a hand. "Let's be real here. Lisa's got 3 years of experience and actually knows how to treat customers. Meanwhile, Derek's been running his mouth instead of running sales." Derek turned to the general manager, desperation creeping into his voice. "Sir, you can't seriously be considering..." The general manager sighed, rubbing his temples. "Derek, let's be honest. Shaq isn't wrong." Derek's face turned red. You can't just..." Shaq leaned in, voice calm but commanding. "Oh, I can. And I just did." The room fell completely silent. Derek stood there, stunned, his jaw clenched, his fists shaking at his sides. Shaq turned back to Lisa. "Congratulations. You're the new senior sales lead." Lisa's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes. Derek, who had still been sulking just outside, turned around, hearing the words that made his stomach drop. "Wait," he muttered, watching through the glass. "He's serious?" The customers who had once chuckled at Shaq now rushed inside, disbelief on their faces. Shaq held up a set of keys. "Who wants a free motorcycle?" The dealership exploded into chaos, but this time, the good kind. Derek's smirk was long gone. His face had turned a pale shade of defeat, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He looked around as if searching for someone to back him up, but all he found were silent stares. The customers, the employees, even the general manager, were watching him squirm. The cashier hesitated, glancing between Shaq and the manager. Do I actually start ringing these up? The general manager, clearly still rattled, nodded quickly. Do as he says. The register beeped as the first bike was scanned. The total amount on the screen made the cashier swallow hard. This was the biggest sale they had ever seen. Derek was sweating now. Listen, man, he started, his voice suddenly shaky. I didn't mean any disrespect. It was just, a misunderstanding. Shaq turned his head slightly, studying him. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. A misunderstanding? Derek nodded quickly, grasping at straws. Yeah, I mean, come on. You walked in here dressed like... He stopped himself, realizing he was about to make things worse. Shaq smirked. Dressed like what, Derek? Derek gulped. Nothing, man. Forget it. Shaq turned toward the cashier, completely ignoring Derek's presence. Hey, real quick, how much commission does a guy like Derek usually make on a sale like this? The cashier, eager to distance himself from Derek's mess, did some quick math. At this price? Probably around $50,000. A couple of employees whistled under their breath. Even some of the customers widened their eyes. $50,000. That was life-changing money for a salesman. Derek perked up immediately, his hope rekindled. Exactly. Man, come on, you don't want me to miss out on that, right? Shaq snapped his fingers. Oh, wait. That's right. He grinned. You didn't want my business. Derek's stomach dropped. The employees tried not to laugh. Even Lisa, standing to the side, had to bite her lip. Shaq let the silence linger, watching Derek grapple with reality. So, Shaq continued, stretching his arms, remind me again, who should I make sure gets this commission? Lisa's eyes widened slightly. She didn't dare assume he meant her, but a small hope flickered in her expression. Derek, realizing what was about to happen, lunged at the opportunity. Listen, man, Derek said, forcing a grin. I know I made a bad first impression, but I'm the top salesman here. I know these bikes inside and out. I can hook you up with the best deals, custom mods, whatever you need. Shaq held up a hand. Nah, I already got everything I need. He turned to Lisa. And you? Lisa's breath hitched. Sir? Shaq gestured toward the register. You ever made a commission like that before? Lisa's eyes widened. Never. Shaq grinned. Well, you just did. The room erupted. Employees murmured in shock, customers whispered. Even the general manager blinked in surprise. Lisa's hands covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Sir, I don't know what to say. Shaq chuckled. You don't gotta say anything. You earned it by being the only person here who knew how to treat people right. Derek, on the other hand, looked like he was about to be sick. His jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. This is bull... he started, but Shaq cut him off again. Shaq shook his head. This is consequences. Derek's face burned red. He turned toward the general manager, hoping for a lifeline. The general manager simply shrugged. He's the customer, Derek. That was it. That was the moment Derek realized he lost. His biggest sale, gone. His reputation, wrecked. And worst of all, his coworkers were loving every second of it. The cashier couldn't hold back a laugh. One of the other salesmen muttered, Damn, bro. That's gotta hurt. Derek gritted his teeth. His eyes darkened. Man, forget this place, he muttered. Shaq watched as Derek stormed past the bikes, past the customers, past the employees who once respected him. He shoved open the dealership doors and disappeared into the night. For the first time since Shaq walked in, the dealership felt lighter. Lisa, still in disbelief, wiped a stray tear from her cheek. Sir, I swear I'll work harder than ever. You won't regret this. Shaq grinned. Oh, I know I won't. The cashier cleared his throat. Mr. O'Neill? Now that Lisa's getting the commission, how do you want to pay? Shaq leaned in, smirking. Oh, we're not done yet. I still got one more condition. The entire dealership froze as Shaq made his next demand. The moment Shaq spoke, the energy in the dealership shifted. Everyone, even the customers who had just been browsing, turned their full attention to him. The cashier's fingers hovered over the register, awaiting further instructions. The general manager stood stiff, his relief at securing a multi-million-dollar sale briefly overshadowed by Shaq's cryptic statement. Derek, on the other hand, he looked like a man on death row. I'll tell you, if Derek does something first, Shaq repeated, his deep voice carrying across the silent showroom. Derek's throat bobbed. What do you mean? Shaq didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Lisa, the one employee who had treated him with respect from the start. Lisa, how long you been working here? Lisa blinked, caught off guard. 3 years, sir. Shaq nodded. And when I walked in, you recognized me, right? Lisa hesitated, glancing at the general manager before nodding. Yes. Shaq leaned in slightly. And did you treat me with respect? Lisa's eyes widened slightly, sensing something big was about to happen. Of course. Shaq smirked. You see where I'm going with this? Derek did, and he didn't like it. Beads of sweat formed at his temple. He forced out a nervous chuckle. All right, man. I get it. You made your point. No hard feelings, right? Shaq let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head. Nah, I'm just getting started. Derek swallowed hard. Shaq turned to the general manager. You trust Lisa? The manager nodded without hesitation. Absolutely, she's one of our best employees. Shaq raised an eyebrow. That right? So tell me something. Why is she still taking orders from a guy like Derek? A murmur spread through the showroom. A few employees smirked knowingly. They had clearly dealt with Derek's attitude before. Derek's panic deepened. Wait a minute. Shaq held up a hand. Let's be real here. Lisa's got 3 years of experience and actually knows how to treat customers. Meanwhile, Derek's been running his mouth instead of running sales. Derek turned to the general manager, desperation creeping into his voice. Sir, you can't seriously be considering... The general manager sighed, rubbing his temples. Derek, let's be honest. Shaq isn't wrong. Derek's face turned red. You can't just... Shaq leaned in, voice calm but commanding. Oh, I can. And I just did. The room fell completely silent. Derek stood there, stunned, his jaw clenched, his fists shaking at his sides. Shaq turned back to Lisa. Congratulations. You're the new senior sales lead. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes glistened with tears, overwhelmed by the moment. Sir, I don't know what to say. Shaq chuckled. Just say you're ready for it. Lisa nodded quickly, grinning through the shock. I'm ready. The general manager, though clearly caught off guard, extended a hand to Lisa. Consider it official. The employees burst into applause. Derek, meanwhile, looked like he had just been punched in the gut. Now, Shaq said, turning back to the cashier. About those bikes. The cashier blinked, momentarily lost in the whirlwind of events. Right. How would you like to take delivery? Shaq grinned. I'll tell you. He turned back to Derek, grinning. After Derek apologizes, the entire dealership watched as Derek's humiliation reached its peak. Would he swallow his pride or make things worse? Derek's face went pale. His cocky smirk was long gone, replaced by the unmistakable look of a man who had just realized his own arrogance had cost him everything. The room was dead silent, every customer, employee, and even the manager watching the moment unfold. The only sound was the hum of the dealership's air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of feet as people shifted uncomfortably. Shaq turned to the general manager, his voice firm but calm. Here's my condition. Lisa gets promoted. And Derek? He's done. A few employees exchanged glances, while some barely hid their smirks. They knew Derek had this coming. The general manager hesitated, eyes flicking between Shaq and Derek. On one hand, this was Shaquille O'Neal, a celebrity, a businessman, and someone who had just made the biggest purchase in the dealership's history. On the other, a pushy, arrogant salesman who had cost them a loyal customer. It wasn't a hard decision. Consider it done, the manager finally said, nodding toward Lisa. Lisa, congratulations. You're now senior sales lead. Lisa gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. Wait, seriously? The manager smiled. You earned it. A round of applause broke out. Some of the employees clapped enthusiastically, while others just looked relieved. Derek, meanwhile, was frozen in place. He blinked, his breathing uneven, as if his brain couldn't process what had just happened. Wait, hold on, Derek stammered, voice shaking. This is a joke, right? It's just a misunderstanding. Come on, man. Shaq folded his arms, towering over him. Nah, you were serious when you disrespected me, so I'm serious about this. Derek panicked, his hands clenched into fists. I was just joking. I mean, it's a high-end dealership. You don't expect us to take everyone seriously, right? You can't fire me over a joke. Lisa finally spoke up. Her voice was steady. No, Derek, she said, lifting her chin. You weren't joking. You were judging. And now? It caught up with you. Derek's jaw clenched. He turned desperately to the manager. Come on, sir. You can't actually... The manager cut him off. Derek, I should have fired you months ago. Derek's shoulders stiffened. You're making a mistake, he spat. You'll regret this. Shaq let out a low chuckle. Doubt it. Derek's face burned with humiliation. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit, shoving past a few customers. The moment he stepped outside, the doors swung shut behind him. like a final nail in the coffin. The dealership breathed a collective sigh of relief. But Shaq? He wasn't done yet. The dealership was silent. Everyone was still processing Shaq's last words. Josh, the cashier, blinked. Wait, giving them away? Lisa, the newly promoted manager, covered her mouth in shock. The other employees exchanged stunned glances. Customers in the showroom froze mid-step, trying to figure out if they heard correctly. Shaq stood tall, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. Yeah, every single one. Derek, who had been sulking in a corner after being fired, suddenly snapped to attention. His jaw clenched as he stepped forward. You can't just do that. These bikes are worth millions. Shaq turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Derek like a laser. I can, and I just did. Lisa, finally regaining her voice, asked hesitantly, Shaq, you really mean that? You're giving all these bikes away? Shaq nodded. Yep, I don't need them, but I know people who do. Murmurs rippled through the dealership. Customers stepped forward, eager but skeptical. Was this real? Then Shaq clapped his hands together, his deep voice booming across the showroom. All right, listen up. Who wants a free motorcycle? The room erupted into chaos. People gasped. Some laughed in disbelief. Others fumbled for their phones, recording the moment. A man in his late 50s stepped forward hesitantly. His clothes were worn, his hands rough from years of hard labor. Sir, I've been saving for months. I was going to buy a bike today, but I didn't have enough. Shaq grinned. Well, guess what? You don't need to save anymore. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, and tossed it to the man. It's yours. The man caught the key, staring at it like it was made of gold. His lips trembled. For real? Shaq patted his shoulder. For real. Tears welled in the man's eyes. He clutched the key in his calloused hands, overwhelmed. Thank you. Thank you, man. A young woman in her 20s wearing a delivery uniform stepped forward next. I work 2 jobs. My car broke down last month. I've been biking to work, but Shaq cut her off with a grin, tossing another key. Not anymore. Her eyes went wide. She caught the key with shaking hands, then covered her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't even know what to say. Shaq shrugged. Say vroom vroom. The dealership burst into laughter. Lisa, still stunned, turned to Shaq. You just walked in here, got insulted, bought every bike, fired the worst employee, and now you're giving them away? Shaq winked. Yeah, feels like a good day, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Derek, standing at the edge of the crowd, was fuming. His fists clenched as he watched the excitement unfold. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control. As more people came forward, Shaq continued handing out keys like candy. A veteran, a struggling father, a college student drowning in debt. Each time the reaction was the same: shock, disbelief, gratitude. The energy in the dealership was electric. Employees, who had once feared for their jobs under Derek's rule, now cheered as they watched life-changing moments unfold. Then, a small voice piped up. Excuse me, sir? Shaq looked down to see a little boy, no older than 10, tugging at his hoodie. The boy's mother stood behind him, looking embarrassed. Sorry, Mr. O'Neill. He just wanted to thank you. We came to see the bikes today, but Shaq knelt down to the kid's level. You like bikes, little man? The boy nodded eagerly. Yeah, but my mom says we can't afford one. Shaq smiled, then glanced at Lisa. We got any kid-sized bikes in here? Lisa grinned. Actually, we do. A few minutes later, an employee wheeled out a custom mini motorcycle, a perfect fit for the little boy. Shaq handed him the key. This one's for you. The boy gasped, looking up at his mom. For real? His mother's eyes welled up. Are you serious? Shaq nodded. 100%. The boy whooped, jumping up and down. His mom pulled Shaq into a tight hug, whispering, You have no idea what this means to us. Shaq patted her back. I think I do. As the last of the bikes were given away, an employee leaned over. Lives, what would you have done in Shaq's place? Comment below to Lisa. This is gonna make headlines, isn't it? Lisa chuckled. Oh yeah, big time. Shaq stretched his arms and yawned. All right, y'all, that's it. No more bikes left, but don't worry. I'm sure I'll find another way to shake things up soon. The dealership erupted into cheers, but outside, in the parking lot, Derek stood watching, his face twisted in fury. His job was gone. His reputation was ruined. And now, Shaq had turned his dealership into a fairy tale. His fists clenched as he gritted his teeth. He thinks this is over? Shaq, stepping outside, caught sight of Derek lingering near the exit. He smirked. You still here, Derek? Derek's eyes burned with resentment. You ruined my career. Shaq took a step closer, towering over him. No, man, you did that. I just made sure everyone saw it. Derek swallowed hard. He had no comeback. Shaq chuckled. Now go on. Maybe next time you'll think twice before judging someone by their hoodie. Derek turned sharply and stormed off into the night. Lisa appeared beside Shaq, watching Derek leave. Think he learned his lesson? Shaq shrugged. Maybe. But me? He grinned. I got a feeling this is just getting started. Lisa's phone buzzes. A news alert. Shaq's giveaway? It's already gone viral. And the dealership? About to become the most famous in the country. The warm afternoon sun cast long shadows on the pavement as Shaq stepped outside the dealership. The energy in the air was electric. Employees peered out from behind the glass windows. Customers froze mid-step, and people on the street turned their heads, drawn by the commotion. Shaq clutched a handful of keys in his massive hand, twirling one between his fingers before holding it up like a golden ticket. All right, his voice boomed, carrying over the hushed crowd. Who wants a free motorcycle? For a second, there was silence. People blinked at him in confusion, as if they'd misheard. Then the place erupted. A chorus of gasps, shouts, and sheer disbelief filled the air. A man holding a helmet nearly dropped it. A woman grabbed her friend's arm, eyes wide. A group of teenagers with their phones out screamed in excitement, recording the moment. Wait, what? Someone shouted. No way! Another voice chimed in. Shaq just grinned. You heard me? Free motorcycles. No catch. The crowd exploded into cheers. Lisa, standing by the entrance, exchanged a stunned glance with the other employees. I don't even know what to say. One of the mechanics, an older man with oil-stained hands, let out a low whistle. Man just flipped this place upside down. Shaq turned toward the first person he saw, a middle-aged guy in a worn-out leather jacket. He looked like a biker, but not the flashy kind. More like the type who'd been riding for decades, not out of luxury, but because it was his life. Shaq extended a key toward him. You ride? The man hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, but I wasn't here to buy, just looking. Shaq smirked. Not anymore, take it. The guy's hands shook as he reached out, barely able to process what was happening. He clutched the key like it was made of pure gold. This is unreal, he whispered. Shaq clapped him on the back. Enjoy the ride, brother. Before the shock could settle, Shaq turned to the next person, a woman in her late 20s, wearing a faded work uniform with the name Jasmine embroidered on the front. You ride? He asked. She laughed nervously. No, but I walk 6 miles to work every day. Shaq didn't hesitate. He tossed her a key. Not anymore, Jasmine gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. Oh my God, you have no idea what this means. The crowd roared with excitement. One by one, Shaq handed out keys, each moment more emotional than the last. A delivery driver, who had been saving up for a year but still fell short. A young college student drowning in debt, never imagining he could own something like this. A father who worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Every time, the reaction was the same. Shock, disbelief, overwhelming gratitude. And then, a man in his 40s, standing toward the back, broke down in tears. The crowd fell silent as they turned toward him. His body shook as he covered his face, trying to hold himself together. Shaq took a step closer. Hey man, you all right? The man wiped his face, letting out a shaky breath before nodding. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, crumpled piece of paper. This is my daughter's Christmas list. His voice trembled. She only asked for one thing this year, a motorcycle, but I couldn't afford it. I told her maybe next year. The crowd fell completely silent. Shaq didn't say a word. He just stretched out his hand, dangling a key in front of the man. The man sank to his knees. People in the crowd gasped, some with tears in their own eyes. Lisa, watching from the entrance, swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. The man reached up with shaking hands, taking the key as he sobbed. I don't even know how to thank you, he choked out. Shaq knelt beside him, his deep voice softer now. You don't have to, man. Just make sure she gets her Christmas wish. The crowd erupted into applause. Phones were out, cameras flashing, recording every second. The moment was too powerful, too emotional to keep to themselves. Lisa turned to the mechanic beside her. This is gonna go viral, isn't it? The old man chuckled, shaking his head. No doubt about it. Shaq stood up, dusting off his hoodie. He turned to the rest of the crowd. All right, y'all, that's it. Every bike's gone. The cheers got even louder. But in the distance, just outside the dealership, someone watched. Derek. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his face twisted with resentment. He had lost his job, his pride, his reputation, all in the span of a single afternoon. And now, Shaq had just made history. Derek clenched his jaw, his mind racing. This wasn't over. As Shaq basks in the moment, Lisa's phone buzzes. A news alert. Shaq's giveaway is already trending. And Derek? He's got an idea brewing. But what is he planning? The crowd was still buzzing from the excitement when a man slowly stepped forward, his movements hesitant, almost unsure if he was allowed to. His name tag read Jason, and his face, lined with exhaustion and quiet determination, told a story before he even spoke. Shaq noticed the way Jason clutched his wallet in his hand, fingers tight around the worn leather like it held more than just cash, like it carried hope. Jason cleared his throat, voice thick with emotion. Shaq, I was gonna buy a bike today. Shaq raised an eyebrow, twirling the last key in his massive hand. Yeah? So what happened? Jason exhaled, shaking his head. I've been saving for months. Every extra shift, every side gig, I scraped together what I could. He let out a bitter chuckle. Came in today hoping maybe they'd cut me a deal. The crowd was dead silent now. Even the mechanics, who had been busy in the back, stepped forward to listen. Jason swallowed hard, but I was still short. A single tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed, but Shaq didn't look away. Jason let out a shaky breath, laughing bitterly. I spent the last 20 minutes in my car, trying to decide if I should just go home and keep saving, or put it all on my credit card and hope for the best. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Jason's dream had been right there, within reach, and still too far away. Shaq looked at him for a long moment, then held up the key. Not anymore. Jason's breath caught. His eyes darted from the key to Shaq's face, as if trying to figure out if this was real, or some cruel joke. Shaq extended the key. Take it, man. Jason froze. His hands trembled as he reached forward, hesitating, fingers just inches away. Shaq, I can't just take this. Yes, you can, Shaq interrupted, his voice firm but kind. Because today, it's yours. Jason's fingers finally closed around the key. The moment it landed in his palm, his entire body sagged, like the weight of every sacrifice, every struggle, every late night and early morning had finally lifted. His breath hitched. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the emotion threatening to spill over. The crowd erupted into applause. A few employees wiped their eyes. Even Lisa, standing off to the side, blinked rapidly, trying to keep her emotions in check. Jason broke. He stepped forward and hugged Shaq, tight, unrestrained, the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. Thank you, he whispered. You don't know what this means. Shaq patted his back. I think I do. Jason finally pulled away, shaking his head, laughing through his tears. This is crazy. I don't even know how to... Shaq grinned. Just ride, man. Jason clutched the key to his chest like it was the most valuable thing he had ever owned. For a long moment, no one spoke. The emotions in the room were too raw, too powerful. And then, a deep, sarcastic voice broke the silence. Well, isn't that sweet? Shaq's jaw clenched. He knew that voice. He turned slowly. Derek, standing just outside the dealership, watching, smirking. The entire dealership turned toward the entrance. Derek was back. But why? The moment was already electric. The crowd cheering, Jason still clutching the keys to his new bike, tears drying on his face. But what no one realized? Someone had been recording the entire thing. A young woman in the crowd, barely holding back her own emotions, had been live streaming. Her phone was pointed directly at Shaq, capturing every second of generosity, every stunned reaction, and every bit of pure, raw emotion. Her caption? Shaq just bought every bike and gave them away, and the reason will make you. And within minutes, the internet was on fire. By the time Shaq stepped outside, stretching his arms like he'd just finished a regular afternoon errand, his phone was already blowing up. Ping. ESPN just mentioned you in a tweet. Ping. TMZ just posted. Shaq turns dealership into a charity event. Must watch. Ping. Man of the year. Trending worldwide. Lisa, still standing beside the dealership entrance, gasped when she checked her own phone. Shaq? Shaq looked over. What's up? She turned the screen toward him, 500,000 views. In under an hour. Shaq just chuckled. Damn, that was fast. Meanwhile, across town, Derek was sitting in his car. His hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The same phone that had been his lifeline, the one he had used to mock Shaq, flex his commissions, act like he ran the dealership, was now the very thing broadcasting his biggest humiliation to the world. His entire face was on the screen, frozen mid-smirk, right before Shaq bought the entire inventory out from under him. And the comments? This dude fumbled the biggest bag of his life. How you gonna flex on Shaq? Imagine getting fired and making Shaq go viral in the same day. Derek's blood boiled. He threw his phone into the passenger seat and gritted his teeth. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Back at the dealership, the phone calls weren't stopping. Lisa's boss, the owner of the entire dealership chain, called Shaq personally. "Man, you just made this store famous," the voice on the other end said, almost in disbelief. Shaq smirked, watching as people across the street filmed the new bike owners riding off, grinning from ear to ear. "Good," Shaq said. "Then you should have no problem keeping Lisa as manager." The owner chuckled. "That's already handled." Lisa gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Shaq grinned. "Thought so." But as the dealership soaked in the moment, someone else was watching. From across the street, Derek. His face was set in a scowl, his fists clenched. He wasn't done yet. Derek's eyes locked on Shaq. He wasn't leaving without a fight. But what was he planning? The sun had long begun its descent, casting an orange glow over the dealership, but the energy outside still buzzed like electricity. Customers were still talking excitedly, engines revving as lucky new bike owners tested their rides. The store employees, still stunned by what just happened, whispered amongst themselves, stealing glances at Shaq like he was a myth come to life. But the moment that hit the hardest, Lisa. She stood near the entrance, staring at Shaq like she couldn't believe any of this was real. Just a few hours ago, she was nothing more than an overlooked employee, taking orders from a manager who never appreciated her. Now, she was promoted to store manager, thanks to one man's decision. She swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Shaq." Her voice was softer than before, more vulnerable. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah?" Lisa hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Not the forced customer service kind of smile she had mastered over the years, but a real, genuine one. "You changed my life today," she said, eyes glistening. "I don't know how to thank you." Shaq chuckled, giving her a nod of approval. "You don't have to." Lisa shook her head. "No, I mean it. I worked my ass off here for 3 years. And Derek? He never respected me, not once. He walked around like he owned the place, treated people like trash, and I just took it." Her fists clenched slightly, but this time not out of defeat, out of realization, out of strength. Shaq crossed his arms, looking down at her with a knowing smirk. "And now?" Lisa exhaled sharply, lifting her chin. "Now? Now, I'm running this place." Shaq's grin widened. "That's what I like to hear." Across the street, a different kind of energy filled the air. Derek sat in his car, phone clenched in his hand. The video of Shaq's takeover, his downfall, played on loop. The comment section was brutal. Derek got exactly what he deserved. Bro fumbled the biggest bag in dealership history. Imagine being that cocky and losing your job on camera. Derek's jaw tightened. His grip on the steering wheel turned his knuckles white. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the best salesman in this place. He knew how to manipulate, how to pressure people into sales. He knew how to read customers, but he had read Shaq wrong. He had messed up, and now, everyone knew it. His humiliation wasn't just contained to the dealership. It was public. Millions of views, thousands of comments. His name, trending for all the wrong reasons. And Shaq? That man had just walked out of the dealership like he owned the damn world. Derek's breathing turned shallow as he watched the final moment of the video. Shaq leaving, laughing. Something about that laughter burned in Derek's chest like fire. His fingers clenched around his phone, and for a second, the rage consumed him. He was done. Shaq stepped outside, breathing in the evening air, feeling good. He had walked into that dealership looking for nothing more than a bike, but he had walked out making a statement. Not about money, not about power, but about respect. Lisa had won. The customers had won. And Derek, he had learned. Hopefully. Shaq shook his head with a chuckle, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pockets. A little girl, no older than 10, tugged on his sleeve. Shaq looked down, amused. "What's up, kid?" She grinned up at him, eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Are you the owner now?" Shaq let out a deep laugh, shaking his head. "Nah, kid." He patted her head lightly. "I'm just making sure no one gets scammed again." Meanwhile, back in Derek's car, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Derek's blood ran cold. His grip tightened on his phone, and for the first time all day, he truly felt fear. Moral of the story? Never judge someone by their hoodie.